At the family dinner, Mom smiled and announced, "Your brother will take your room because he needs more space." As I was about to speak, Dad yelled, "Agree or get out of this house." I didn't argue, I just smiled. 1 week later, I bought the house across the street, watched them fall apart, and said good morning every day. My name is Arthur, I'm 26 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I was the resident ghost in my own family's home. It's a strange thing to be physically present but entirely invisible. To sit at a dinner table and feel like you're a piece of furniture, something to be looked through, not at. For as long as I can remember, that was my reality. A life lived in the long, eclipsing shadow of my older brother, Julian. We lived in a perfectly average 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Richmond, the kind of place with manicured lawns and neighbors who waved but didn't really know you. From the outside, we were the picture of a normal family. A hardworking father, Mark, a doting mother, Helen, and their 3 children. But inside those walls, the balance was anything but normal. It was a kingdom, and Julian was the crowned prince. Julian had always been the star. He was loud, charismatic, and had a smile that could charm anyone. Early on, he decided he was destined for fame, and my parents became his most devoted followers. He was going to be a big-time influencer, a streamer, someone people looked up to. My father, a retail manager who spent his days dealing with inventory and schedules, saw in Julian all the glamour and excitement his own life lacked. My mother, a bank employee who processed other people's money all day, treated Julian like he was the family's winning lottery ticket. They poured everything into him. New cameras, microphones, high-tech computers, anything his career demanded. They were his first subscribers, his most loyal fans. Then there was my younger sister, Clara. She was the baby of the family, and she got whatever affection was left over. She was quiet like me, but she learned early on how to stay out of Julian's way and still get what she wanted. She was never the star, but at least she was in the cast. And me? I was the stagehand, the quiet one who loved numbers, books, and the steady, predictable logic of economics. While Julian was practicing his on-camera persona in the mirror, I was in my small room, my sanctuary, poring over books about the stock market and investment strategies. My passions were silent, internal, and to my parents, utterly useless. I remember one dinner so clearly. Feels like it was just last night. Mom had made pot roast, Dad's favorite. Julian was on his phone, as usual, his thumb scrolling furiously. He let out a whoop of excitement. "Just hit 50,000 followers," he announced, holding up his phone for everyone to see. "Oh, Julian, that's wonderful," Mom gushed, her eyes sparkling. "Mark, did you hear that? 50,000. Dad clapped him on the back, a proud grin stretching across his face. "That's my boy. See? That new lighting setup was a good investment. Soon you'll be getting a real promotion in this social media world." A little later, trying to be part of the conversation, I mentioned, I passed my Series 7 exam today. It's a big step for a financial advisor license." My dad grunted, not looking up from his plate. "That's nice, son." Mom just smiled vaguely and turned back to Julian. "So, honey, what's your next big video going to be about?" The conversation moved on, leaving me behind, as it always did. I just sat there, chewing my pot roast, the silence around me louder than all the chatter at the table. I wasn't jealous of Julian's followers. I was starved for a single ounce of the validation they gave him so freely. I was just the quiet son, the boring one with the number-crunching hobby. They had no idea that in my small, overlooked room, I wasn't just crunching numbers. I was building an empire, brick by silent brick. And they were about to find out just how big it had become. The roots of my family's blindness go deep, but there's one memory that stands out. One that feels like the moment the foundation of my trust in them cracked for good. It was the summer I turned 15. The air was thick with the smell of cut grass and the sound of cicadas, and I was working my first real job. I wasn't flipping burgers or mowing lawns. I was bagging groceries down at the local supermarket. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were long, and my back ached at the end of every shift, but I didn't care. Every dollar, every quarter felt like a victory. I had a goal. I wasn't saving for a car or a new video game console. I had discovered a passion for the stock market, a world of numbers and patterns that just made sense to me. I found an online course, a comprehensive program on investment fundamentals taught by a retired Wall Street analyst. It cost $500. To a 15-year-old making a little over $7 an hour, it might as well have been $1 million. But I was determined. I saved every penny. I turned down movies with friends, I packed my own lunches, and I funneled every single paycheck into an old tin box I kept hidden under my bed. I'd count it every night, the stack of worn bills growing slowly but surely. It was more than just money. It was my future. It was my way out, my ticket to a world that valued what I had to offer. By the end of August, I had done it. $497. I just needed one more small paycheck. I was so close I could taste it. That was the week Julian discovered a new, essential piece of equipment for his streaming career. It was a state-of-the-art capture card, something that would supposedly make his video game streams look more professional. He went on and on about it at dinner, talking about refresh rates and pixel clarity, things I didn't understand and my parents understood even less. But they nodded along, their eyes shining with pride. The next day, I came home from my shift, tired but excited. I had my final paycheck in my pocket. I went straight to my room, pulled out the tin box, and my heart stopped. It was empty. Every single dollar was gone. I frantically searched my room, thinking maybe I'd moved it, but I knew I hadn't. A cold dread washed over me. I walked out to the living room, the empty box feeling heavy in my hands. My parents and Julian were there, admiring the new piece of tech plugged into his computer. "Mom? Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My money. It's gone." My mother, Helen, wouldn't look at me. She just kept fiddling with a cushion on the sofa. My father, Mark, cleared his throat and stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It felt more like a restraint. "Now, son," he said, his voice calm, rational. "We need to think of this as a family investment." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Julian needed that new equipment," he explained, pointing toward my brother. "It's for his future, for our future. He's gonna make it big, Arthur. And when he does, he'll pay you back 100 times over. You should be proud you could help your brother get a leg up." I looked over at Julian. He was already busy setting up a test stream, a smug little smile on his face. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He just shrugged. "It's for the brand, bro." I stood there, speechless. My dream, my hard work, every exhausting hour I'd spent bagging groceries for strangers. It had all been sacrificed on the altar of my brother's ambition. They hadn't asked. They had just taken. They didn't see it as my money. They saw it as a resource for the family's chosen one. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just turned around, went back to my room, and shut the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt like the sound of something inside me breaking. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, the empty tin box on my desk, and I made a promise to myself. I would never again depend on them for anything. I would build my own future so far out of their reach that they could never touch it, never take it, never even comprehend it. A few years passed. I was in my late teens, getting ready for college. The wound from the stolen savings had scabbed over, but the scar remained. A constant, dull ache that reminded me to be careful, to be self-reliant. I was working 2 part-time jobs while still in high school, saving up for my own college fund, determined to never be in a position of weakness again. Julian, meanwhile, was escalating his ambitions. His streaming channel had a modest following, but in his mind, and my parents' minds, he was on the verge of superstardom. All he needed was a professional studio upgrade. This wasn't just a new microphone. He wanted soundproofing for his room, multiple monitors, a custom-built PC that cost more than a decent used car, and a whole suite of professional editing software. The price tag was staggering. My parents, of course, were fully on board. The problem was, their own finances were stretched thin. They had decent jobs, but they weren't wealthy. Julian's constant demands had already eaten into their savings. So they hatched a plan that, to this day, makes my stomach turn with a cold, hard knot of betrayal. It happened on a busy Tuesday morning. I was rushing to get ready for school, grabbing a piece of toast and my backpack. My dad stopped me in the kitchen, a stack of papers in his hand and a serious look on his face. "Arthur, got a second? We need you to sign something," he said, his tone urgent but casual. "What is it?" I asked, glancing at the clock. I was going to be late for a calculus exam. "It's just some paperwork for the bank," my mom chimed in, walking over and putting a comforting arm around my shoulders. "You know, with your dad's job and everything, we're refinancing the house to get a better interest rate. Since you're over 18 and living here, they just need your signature as a resident. It's just a formality." It sounded plausible. I was legally an adult, after all. They looked so sincere, so normal. My dad was already holding a pen out to me, pointing to a signature line at the bottom of a page filled with dense legal text. "Right here, son. We're in a hurry to get this to the bank before it closes," he said, tapping the page impatiently. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. A tiny voice in the back of my head screamed, "Read it. Read everything." But I was late. My dad was looking at me with that impatient expression. My mom was smiling her warm, reassuring smile. These were my parents. They wouldn't lie to me about something so important. Would they? I pushed the doubt away. "Okay, sure," I said, quickly scrawling my name where he pointed. I didn't even read the line above it. I just signed, grabbed my backpack, and rushed out the door. For weeks, I didn't think anything of it. Life went on. Julian got his studio upgrade, and his room was transformed into a high-tech command center. He bragged endlessly about the business loan he'd secured, making it sound like he was some kind of savvy entrepreneur. I just ignored it, focusing on my own goals. Graduating, getting into college, and getting out of that house. The truth didn't come out until almost a year later. I was applying for my first student loan, a small one just to cover books and fees that my scholarships didn't. I was rejected. Confused, I pulled my credit report. And there it was, a massive business loan co-signed by me. My name was right there, next to my father's, legally binding me to a debt of over $50,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room started to spin. The casual Tuesday morning, the stack of papers, my mother's smile. It all came rushing back, but now it was tainted, ugly. It wasn't a refinancing document. It was a loan application for Julian's studio. They had used me. They had leveraged my clean credit history and my trust to fund my brother's fantasy, chaining me to a huge financial risk without my knowledge or consent. I confronted them that night, the credit report shaking in my hand. They didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. "We knew you wouldn't have understood," my dad said, his arms crossed defensively. "You're too cautious with money, Arthur. This was a necessary step for Julian's career. You lied to me. You committed fraud," I yelled, my voice raw with a pain so deep it felt like it was tearing me apart. "Don't be so dramatic," my mom said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just a piece of paper. Julian will be making so much money soon, it'll be paid off in no time. It won't affect you." But it already had. That single signature had jeopardized my own financial future. I could have hired a lawyer, I could have sued my own family. But I was 19, overwhelmed, and I knew it would just tear everything apart and leave me with nothing. So I did what I always did. I retreated. I shut myself in my room. But this time, the fire inside me wasn't just determination. It was rage. Cold, quiet, calculating rage. They thought it was just a piece of paper. I was going to show them exactly what pieces of paper in the right hands could do. The betrayal of the co-signed loan was the final push I needed. It was no longer just about proving them wrong. It was about creating a fortress of success so high and so impenetrable that their toxicity could never reach me again. My small bedroom, once just a sanctuary, became my headquarters, my war room. The four walls that had seen my quiet tears now witnessed a silent, relentless ambition. I turned down the acceptance letters from out-of-state universities. Couldn't risk it. I needed to stay close, to keep an eye on that loan, to make sure Julian's inevitable irresponsibility didn't drag my name through the mud before I even had a chance to build it. So, I accepted a full academic scholarship to the local university in Richmond. It was a great school for finance, and it meant I could live at home, saving every penny and channeling it into my real education. The market. My life became a study in brutal efficiency. I scheduled my days down to the minute. College classes from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. A part-time job at a small local financial firm from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Dinner was a necessary evil. A half hour of enduring Julian's boasts and my parents' fawning. And then, from 8 p.m. until 2 or 3 in the morning, my real work began. While the rest of the house was bathed in the blue glow of television screens or the flashing lights of Julian's video games, my room was lit by the steady, intense glow of my computer monitor. I devoured everything. I read textbooks on wealth management, took free online courses from Ivy League schools, and studied the strategies of legendary investors. I wasn't just learning. I was dissecting, absorbing, creating my own philosophy of finance. At my part-time job, I wasn't just filing papers. I was listening. I paid attention to the concerns of the clients. Small business owners worried about cash flow, retirees terrified of outliving their savings, young couples trying to figure out how to save for a down payment and a college fund at the same time. I saw a huge gap in the market. The big firms catered to the wealthy. Regular people, the ones who needed sound advice the most, were left to figure it out on their own. And that's where my idea was born. During my sophomore year of college, using a refurbished laptop I bought with my own money, I launched Clarity Financial Consulting. The name was intentional. I wanted to bring clarity to the confusing world of personal finance. My initial investment was less than $100 for a domain name and a simple website template. My first clients were my coworkers at the firm. I'd help them set up a budget over lunch or give them tips on their 401 allocations. My advice was simple, practical, and it worked. Word started to spread. A coworker told her brother, who owned a small landscaping business. He became my first official paying client. He was so thrilled with the results. I helped him restructure his debt and free up enough capital to buy a new truck that he recommended me to 3 other business owners. It snowballed from there, all from my little room. My desk was cluttered with client files and spreadsheets. My phone, a cheap prepaid model, became my business line. I'd take calls in a hushed voice, often stepping out onto the back porch so my family wouldn't overhear. To them, I was still just playing with numbers. They'd see the light on under my door late at night and assume I was studying for a test. They had no idea I was on a conference call with a client on the West Coast, finalizing a multi-year investment strategy. By the time I graduated from college, summa cum laude, Clarity Financial was a thriving 6-figure business. But you'd never know it by looking at me. I still drove my 10-year-old Honda. I still wore clothes from discount stores. I paid off that fraudulent loan Julian had taken out, quietly, without ever telling them. It was a silent victory, the first of many. My bank account was growing, but I lived like a monk, reinvesting every dollar back into the business or into my own portfolio. I was building my fortress, and I was in no hurry to show it to the world, especially not to the people living right under the same roof. They were completely oblivious, and that's exactly how I wanted it. In a life defined by isolation, there was one person who saw me. Not the quiet son or the invisible brother, but me, Arthur. His name was Leo, and he was my anchor in the storm that was my family. We met in an advanced economics class during my freshman year of college. The professor was droning on about macroeconomic theory, and most of the class had a glazed-over look in their eyes. But I saw him, a few rows over, scribbling furiously in his notebook, nodding along as if the professor was revealing the secrets of the universe. After class, I saw he'd left a book behind. It was a well-worn copy of The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, my personal Bible. I picked it up and caught up with him in the hallway. "You forgot this," I said, handing it to him. His face lit up. "Oh man, thank you. I would have been lost without this." He looked at me, really looked at me. "You're the only other person in that class who wasn't falling asleep." "I'm Leo." "Arthur," I said, and that was it. We spent the next hour in the student lounge, not talking about parties or sports, but about compound interest and market volatility. For the first time in my life, I was having a conversation with a peer who didn't think my passions were weird or boring. He got it. He was just as fascinated by the intricate dance of numbers as I was. Leo became my only confidant. A few months into our friendship, after another particularly draining family dinner where Julian had announced a new sponsorship deal for a ridiculous energy drink, I finally broke down. We were studying in the library, and I just put my head in my hands. "You okay, man?" Leo asked, his voice low. I told him everything. The years of being overlooked, the stolen savings, the co-signed loan. I expected him to be shocked, maybe even a little disbelieving. But he just listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "They're fools, Arthur. Not just for how they treat you, but for what they're failing to see. You're the smartest guy I know. You're building something real, something that will last. His fame, it's a bubble. It's temporary. What you're doing, that's legacy." His words were like a lifeline. In a world where my own family made me feel worthless, my friends saw my value. Leo was the one I called when I landed my first major client. He was the one who helped me proofread the copy for my first website. And he was the one who came over with a cheap bottle of champagne when my business officially crossed the $1 million valuation mark. We celebrated in my cramped little room, whispering so my family wouldn't hear, the plastic cups clinking in a toast to my silent success. "One day," he said, looking around at my worn-out desk and shelves overflowing with books, "you're going to have an office with a view of the entire city." "Maybe," I said with a shrug, "but for now this works." Having Leo in my corner made all the difference. He was the voice of reason when my family's dysfunction made me doubt myself. He was the one who reminded me that my path, though lonely, was the right one. He didn't just see the fortress I was building. He helped me lay some of the stones. He was my brother in a way Julian never could be, and I knew without a doubt that when the time came to finally make my move, Leo would be standing right there with me. The night it all finally imploded started just like any other Saturday. The air in our house was thick with the smell of my mom's roasted chicken and the low hum of unspoken resentment. I walked into the dining room armed with the quiet resignation that had become my shield. Dad was at the head of the table looking stern. Julian was, of course, glued to his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. Clara was methodically pushing her green beans around her plate, a master of the art of being present but absent. I took my seat, bracing myself for the usual performance. For a while, it was the standard script. Julian would make a grand pronouncement about his channel's growth. My parents would respond with the appropriate oohs and ahs. I would eat my chicken and try to become one with the wallpaper. But tonight, there was a different energy in the room. My mother, Helen, had a particular glint in her eye, a look I'd come to recognize. It was her grand announcement look. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork, clasped her hands together, and beamed at the table. It was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "your father and I have had a long talk, and we have some exciting family news." I tensed up. Exciting family news usually meant some new expense for Julian that the rest of us were expected to accommodate. She turned her gaze directly to me. "Arthur, sweetheart, Julian's career is really taking off, and he needs a more professional space to work. A real studio." I already knew where this was going. My stomach tightened. "So," she continued, her smile unwavering, "we've decided it's time for him to take over your room. It's bigger, has better light. It's perfect for what he needs." The silence that followed was deafening. My room. It wasn't just a room. It was my office. It was the nerve center of my entire operation. It was the place I had built a multimillion-dollar company from nothing. It was the only space in that entire house that was truly mine. And she was talking about giving it away for Julian's video game streams as if she were asking me to pass the salt. I put my fork down slowly. I opened my mouth to speak, to protest, to finally, after all these years, unleash the torrent of facts and figures that I had kept locked away. But before I could utter a single syllable, my father's fist came crashing down on the table. The plates and glasses jumped. "This is not a discussion," he boomed, his face turning a deep, angry red. His eyes bored into me, cold and hard. "You will give your brother that room. You can move your things into the small guest room in the basement. Agree to it or you can get out of this house. We have no place for someone who won't support this family." The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and brutal. I looked around the table. Julian leaned back in his chair, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He put his phone down, wanting to savor his victory. Clara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something I couldn't quite read. My father's words echoed in my head. Support this family. All I had ever done was on my own. I never asked them for a dime. I paid for my own college, my own car, my own life, all while living under their roof. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I could have fought. I could have screamed. I could have pulled out my phone right then and there and showed them my business bank account balance. But in that moment, looking at their expectant, hostile faces, I realized something. They didn't deserve an explanation. They didn't deserve a fight. They deserved consequences. So, I did something they never expected. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow, deliberate sip of water, and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was calm, it was measured, and it was utterly devoid of the defeat they were so eager to see. My mother's brow furrowed in confusion. My father's jaw tightened. Julian's smirk wavered for just a second. They didn't know what to do with my smile. They had expected tears or anger. They had no idea that my smile was a declaration of war. My smile, my quiet refusal to either break down or fight back, clearly threw them for a loop. They had expected a simple outcome. I would either crumble and comply or I would lash out and they would have the moral high ground to kick me out. My calm defiance left them without a script. The rest of that dinner was excruciatingly awkward. They tried to go back to their conversation, but the energy was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering uncertainty. For the next few days, a strange cold war descended upon the house. They avoided me, speaking in hushed tones whenever I entered a room. I knew they were plotting, trying to figure out their next move. I just went about my business, making calls from my car, meeting clients at coffee shops, and spending my nights in my room, not just working, but preparing. Their next move came on a Wednesday evening. It was so transparent, so manipulative, it was almost laughable. I came home from a client meeting to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. My father was pacing the floor, his face a mask of worry. The air was thick with manufactured crisis. "Mom? Dad? What's wrong?" I asked, playing my part. My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with fake tears. "Oh, Arthur," she sobbed, reaching for my hand. "It's terrible. Just terrible. Your mother got a call from the bank today," my father said, his voice heavy with false despair. "The interest rates on the mortgage, they've skyrocketed. We might lose the house, son." I had to actively stop myself from rolling my eyes. I had access to real-time financial data. I knew for a fact that the interest rates hadn't skyrocketed. It was a lie, and a poorly constructed one at that. "They're saying we need to come up with $5,000 in the next week, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings," he continued, running a hand through his hair like a stressed-out actor in a daytime soap opera. My mother tightened her grip on my hand. "We don't know what to do," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek on cue. "We've spent so much helping Julian get his start. Our savings are gone." And there it was. The real play. They weren't just trying to guilt me out of my room anymore. They were making a grab for my money. They still believed I was just a quiet kid with a boring office job, probably with a few $1,000s saved up in a rainy day fund. They thought they could scare me, make me feel responsible for their plight, and get me to hand over my life savings to solve a problem that didn't exist. The $5,000 would, of course, go straight into Julian's pocket for whatever new gadget he wanted. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face to my father's worried expression. The performance was almost impressive in its shamelessness. For a moment, I felt a flash of the old hurt, the sting of being seen not as a son, but as a resource to be exploited. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I gently pulled my hand away from my mother's. I looked them both in the eye, my expression one of deep, sincere concern. "This is terrible," I said, my voice steady. "Losing the house is not an option. We have to fight this." They both nodded eagerly, relief washing over their faces. They thought they had me. "Okay," I continued, adopting a businesslike tone. "First thing tomorrow morning, I need you to gather all the paperwork. The original mortgage agreement, any refinancing documents, and the official notice from the bank about this rate hike. I'll take a look at everything. With my background in finance, I might be able to find a loophole or at least negotiate a better deal for you. We need to see exactly what they're claiming in writing." The effect was instantaneous. My mother's tears dried up. My father's pacing stopped. A look of panic flashed between them. "Well, my dad stammered. "It was a phone call. It was very sudden. There's no paperwork yet." "No paperwork?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. A bank would never initiate foreclosure proceedings without a formal, written notice of default. That's a legal requirement. It sounds like you might have been the target of a scam call, Dad. I let the word scam hang in the air. Their faces went from panic to furious. They had been caught. Their clumsy little play had been exposed with a few simple, logical questions. "You think we're lying?" My father snarled, his mask of worry completely gone. "I think you need to get me the paperwork if you want my help," I said calmly. "I'm not handing over a single cent without seeing the official documents." I turned and walked to my room, leaving them standing there in the ruins of their own pathetic lie. The war was no longer cold, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to win it. The failed attempt to manipulate me out of my money was their last desperate gambit. After that, the atmosphere in the house became openly hostile. They no longer bothered with fake smiles or pleasantries. I was met with icy glares and a thick, suffocating silence. It didn't matter. I was already gone in spirit. My body was just waiting for the right moment to follow. That moment came the very next day. The first call I made wasn't to a moving company. It was to a woman named Ms. Davis, a sharp, no-nonsense real estate agent I had been working with in secret for the better part of 6 months. My family thought I was just scraping by. In reality, I had been methodically growing my investment portfolio, and a significant portion of it was earmarked for one specific purpose: my escape. "Ms. Davis, it's Arthur," I said, speaking quietly into my phone from the driver's seat of my parked car a few blocks from my house. "It's time. I was wondering when you'd call," she replied, her voice crisp and professional. "Are you thinking about the condo downtown we looked at?" "No," I said, my eyes fixed on a specific house visible from my rearview mirror. It was directly across the street from my parents' home. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial, a significant step up from our modest house. It had a wraparound porch, a big, mature oak tree in the front yard, and a for sale sign that had just gone up 2 days prior. "I want the house on Elm Street, the one across from me." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "That's a bold choice, Arthur," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I like it. It's listed at a premium. The owners are looking for a quick, clean sale." "That's what they'll get," I said. "I want you to make them an offer. Full asking price. No, 20,000 over asking. All cash. No contingencies. I want to close by the end of the week." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "An offer like that they won't be able to refuse. I'll get the paperwork started immediately. You'll need to wire the funds for escrow by tomorrow morning." "The money will be there," I assured her. The next few days were a blur of encrypted emails, secure document signing, and massive wire transfers. It was the easiest and most significant financial transaction of my life. While my family was inside stewing, treating me like an ungrateful freeloader they were about to kick to the curb, I was quietly buying my freedom right under their noses. By Friday afternoon, it was done. Ms. Davis called me with the news. "Congratulations, Arthur," she said. "The house is yours. The keys are waiting for you in a lockbox on the front door. It was a pleasure doing business with you." I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I drove home, parked my car, and walked up the driveway of the house I had grown up in, knowing it would be for the last time. I had spent years in that house feeling small, feeling invisible, feeling trapped. I had built an empire in a tiny room they were trying to take from me. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet. I went up to my room and stood in the doorway, looking at the worn-out desk, the overflowing bookshelves, the place where it had all started. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was just a room. My real home was waiting for me, right across the street. The fortress I had been building wasn't just financial. It was real. It had a foundation, for walls, and a front porch with a perfect view of the life I was about to leave behind. The final act was set for Sunday morning. It was their favorite time for family meetings, which were usually just lectures directed at me. I decided to use their stage for my own premiere. I didn't pack a single box. I left everything in my room exactly as it was. This wasn't going to be a quiet departure. It was going to be a reckoning. I came downstairs to find them all in the living room, a makeshift tribunal. My father was in his armchair, looking like a judge. My mother was on the sofa, her arms crossed. Julian was lounging on the other end, scrolling through his phone, looking bored but ready to enjoy the show. They were waiting for me. "Arthur," my father began, his voice low and menacing. "We have been more than patient. You have one final chance. Are you going to give up the room? Or are you packing your bags today?" I let the question hang in the air. I walked over to the coffee pot, poured myself a mug, and took a slow sip. Their impatience was palpable. "I've made my decision," I said finally, setting the mug down on the coffee table. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. "I'll be moving out." A wave of relief and triumph washed over their faces. My mother let out a little sigh, as if a great burden had been lifted. My father nodded, a grimly satisfied look in his eyes. "Good," he said. "It's for the best. You have until the end of the day to get your things out." Julian snickered from the couch. "Where are you gonna go, bro? Back to your dinky apartment sharing from college? Maybe you can rent a room from a friend, if you have any." I ignored him. I looked at my parents, at their smug, self-satisfied faces. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully purged the ungrateful, unsupportive element from their perfect family unit. "Actually," I said, my voice perfectly level, "I won't need the whole day, and I've already got a place." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, shiny new key attached to a simple metal ring. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a sharp clink. Then, I pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, the final closing statement and the deed to my new property. I unfolded it and placed it on top of the key. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "What is this?" "That," I said, "is my new address." I paused, letting them all look. Then I pointed a finger out the large picture window that faced the street. "I bought the house across the way, the big colonial with the oak tree." You could have heard a pin drop. My father's jaw went slack. My mother's eyes widened, her face draining of all color as she stared at the deed, then at the house outside, then back at me. Julian's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. For the first time in his life, my brother was utterly speechless. What do you mean you bought it?" My father finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I mean I purchased it," I said, the words clear and cold as ice. "Paid in full. Cash." It turns out that my boring, number-crunching hobby is actually a multimillion-dollar personal finance consulting business. I've been running it out of that little room you were so eager to take from me. That boring job paid for my college, it paid off the fraudulent loan you stuck me with, and now it's paid for my new home. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of their entire world, their entire perception of me, of our family, shattering into a million pieces. They weren't looking at the quiet, compliant son anymore. They were looking at a stranger who held all the power. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. Leaving them in that stunned, suffocating silence was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned, walked out the front door, and crossed the street. I used my new key, stepped inside my new, empty house, and closed the door on my old life. The feeling was indescribable. It was peace. I spent the next week moving in. Not my old furniture. I left all of it behind. I hired a designer and bought everything new. I set up a beautiful, spacious home office with a large mahogany desk and a view of their house. Every morning, I'd make my coffee, step out onto my wraparound porch, and give a friendly little wave across the street. It was a simple gesture, but I knew it was driving them insane. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they would be too consumed with their own shock and shame to bother me anymore. I was wrong. I had underestimated the depths of my brother's narcissism and spite. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I started noticing strange things happening with my business. A prospective client I'd had a great meeting with suddenly sent me a curt email saying they were going in a different direction due to concerns about my firm's integrity. I was confused, but I chalked it up to the unpredictable nature of business. Then it happened again and again. The final straw came from one of my oldest and most loyal clients, a retired doctor named Mr. Henderson. He called me, his voice filled with genuine worry. "Arthur," he said, "I don't believe a word of it, but you need to know what's being said. There are posts popping up on local finance forums and community Facebook groups. They're saying Clarity Financial is a scam, that you're a fraud who preys on the elderly, taking their money and putting it into high-risk, speculative investments." My blood ran cold. "What? Who is saying this?" "They're anonymous accounts," he explained, "but they're very specific. They're mentioning investment strategies I know we've discussed. They're twisting the details, making sound advice look like reckless gambling. Someone is intentionally trying to destroy your reputation." After I hung up, I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't random. This was a targeted attack. The person doing this had intimate knowledge of my business, details that weren't public. There was only one person who could have gotten that information. My mind flashed back to all the times I'd left my work files on my desk in my old room, all the times I'd taken business calls on the back porch where Julian could have been listening from his window. He had been gathering ammunition. With the help of my friend Leo, who was a bit of a tech wizard, we started digging. It didn't take long. The anonymous accounts were sloppy, created in haste and anger. They were all linked back to a single IP address, the IP address of my parents' house. It was Julian. Consumed by a jealous rage he couldn't comprehend, he had resorted to the only thing he knew how to do: tear people down online. He couldn't build something of his own, so he was trying to burn my empire to the ground. The smear campaign was vicious, filled with half-truths and outright lies designed to hit me where it hurt the most: my professional integrity, the very foundation of my success. He wasn't just trying to hurt my business. He was trying to erase me, to prove that the quiet brother he'd always looked down on couldn't possibly have succeeded on his own merits. The shock quickly hardened into a cold, steely anger. He had crossed a line. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a deliberate, malicious attack on my livelihood. He had started a war he had no idea how to fight, and I wasn't going to let him win. Julian's online attack was clumsy, fueled by rage rather than strategy. He thought he was a master of the internet, but in the real world of consequences, he was a rank amateur. While he was busy creating fake profiles and posting slanderous reviews, I was documenting everything. With Leo's help, I took screenshots of every post, every comment, every fabricated accusation. We traced the digital breadcrumbs back to his accounts, creating a meticulous file of evidence. My first instinct was to call a lawyer and send a cease and desist letter that would scare him straight. But then, I realized I didn't have to. Julian, in his arrogance, was about to become the architect of his own destruction. While he was focused on trying to ruin me, he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered in his world: his own fragile, debt-fueled lifestyle. It turned out his sponsorships and brand deals were not nearly as lucrative as he pretended. To maintain the illusion of success, he had gotten into online gambling. At first, it was small sports bets, but it had quickly spiraled into high-stakes online poker, a world he was completely unprepared for. He was losing, and losing badly. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a sleek, black sedan that parked in front of my parents' house for an entire afternoon. Two large men in ill-fitting suits got out and had a long, and from what I could see from my office window, very tense conversation with my father on the front porch. Dad looked pale and shaken. A few days later, it happened again. This time, the men weren't so polite. Their voices were raised. I couldn't hear the words, but the menace was clear. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a rival streamer, someone Julian had been feuding with for months, got a tip. He did a deep dive investigation and released a devastating expose video, complete with leaked screenshots of Julian's betting history and massive debts to shady online casinos. The video went viral. The internet, the very platform Julian thought he ruled, turned on him with breathtaking speed. His followers, who had once adored him, now spammed his comments with insults and accusations. The sponsors he did have dropped him overnight. His carefully crafted image of a successful, charismatic influencer shattered in less than 24 hours. He was exposed as a fraud and a gambling addict. The creditors, who had previously been dealing with him quietly, now saw him as a flight risk. They stopped being subtle. They started calling the house at all hours, sending aggressive-looking men to knock on the door, demanding payment. From the quiet sanctuary of my new home office, I watched the chaos unfold. I saw my mother wringing her hands on the porch, my father pacing back and forth, his face a permanent mask of stress. I saw Julian, a ghost in his own home, peeking through the blinds, too afraid to even go outside. I held a file full of evidence that could have been the final nail in his coffin, a lawsuit for libel and defamation that would have finished him for good. But as I watched the self-inflicted inferno raging across the street, I put the file away. I didn't need it. He had poured the gasoline and lit the match all by himself. Justice wasn't just coming for him. It was kicking down his front door. The collapse was swift and total. The men in suits were no longer just making visits. They were making threats. Julian's debt wasn't just to one online entity. It was a web of liabilities, some to companies that were less than reputable and employed aggressive, frightening collection tactics. My parents were trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Their golden boy, their sure-bet investment for the family's future, had turned into a catastrophic liability. One evening, I saw my father get into his car and drive away. He returned an hour later with a local real estate agent, the kind whose face you see on bus benches. They stood in the front yard, talking in low tones, the agent occasionally pointing at the house. I knew what was happening. It was their only move left. A few days later, the sign went up. A bright red for sale sign was hammered into the front lawn, where I used to play as a kid. Felt surreal. That house, the backdrop to my entire life, the source of so much pain and invisibility, was being sold. Not for a happy reason like retirement or downsizing, but out of sheer desperation. They had to sell, and they had to sell fast. The pressure from the creditors was immense. They took the first lowball offer that came in, a cash deal from a property flipping company that knew they were desperate. They lost a significant amount of equity, but they got the money they needed to make the immediate threats go away. I watched the moving trucks arrive a few weeks later. It was a sad, pathetic affair. There were no friends or family helping out, just two movers and my parents, looking tired and defeated. They packed up their lives, the furniture that had been in our family for decades, the photo albums, the memories. All of it tainted by the bitter taste of failure. Julian was nowhere to be seen. He stayed inside, hidden away in his room, until the very last moment. The money from the sale was gone almost as soon as it hit their bank account. It was a whirlwind of wire transfers to anonymous accounts and cashier's checks made out to holding companies. A desperate effort to pay off Julian's gambling debts. I later found out from a mutual acquaintance that they also had to settle a hefty sum with one of the clients Julian had slandered online, who had threatened a lawsuit for defamation that would have exposed Julian's actions and implicated my parents. When the dust settled, they were left with almost nothing. The house was gone. Their savings were gone. Their pride was shattered. All they had left was enough money to rent a small, cramped apartment on the far side of town, in a neighborhood they used to look down on. They had bet everything on one son, ignoring the other completely. They had poured all their resources, all their hopes, and all their love into a vessel that was hollow and cracked. And now they had to live with the consequences of that single disastrous investment. From my porch, I watched the moving truck pull away, leaving the house empty and silent. It wasn't a feeling of victory. It was a profound sense of melancholy, a quiet acknowledgement of the predictable, tragic end to their story of favoritism and folly. Amidst the wreckage of my family's implosion, an unexpected olive branch appeared. It came from the one person I least expected it from, my sister, Clara. Throughout my entire ordeal, Clara had been a silent observer. She never joined in the mockery, but she never defended me either. She was a ghost in her own way, navigating the family's toxic dynamics by making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. I had long since written her off as just another part of the system that had enabled Julian and my parents. About a week after they had moved out of the house, my doorbell rang. I was surprised to see her standing on my porch, looking small and nervous. She was clutching the strap of her purse, her eyes fixed on the welcome mat. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside and let her in. We sat in my spacious, sunlit living room, the silence between us awkward and heavy with unspoken history. Finally, she looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I am so sorry for everything." I just looked at her, waiting. "I was a coward," she continued, her voice breaking. "I saw what was happening. I saw how they treated you, how they worshipped Julian. I knew it was wrong, but I was too scared to say anything. I just wanted to stay out of the line of fire. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. But being quiet is the same as agreeing. I see that now. Watching them sell the house, watching everything fall apart. It was like a spell was broken. All those years, I just accepted it as normal. But it wasn't normal. It was sick. She took a shaky breath. "And I'm not here to ask you for anything. I don't want your money. I needed to tell you that I see you. I always did, really. I saw you studying. I saw you working so hard. I was always proud of you, even if I never said it. You built all of this?" she said, gesturing around the beautiful room. "While they were trying to tear you down. You're the strongest person I know." Her apology was raw and genuine. It was everything I had ever wanted to hear from someone in my family, but never expected to receive. It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission of her own part in the silent conspiracy that had defined my childhood. I felt a knot in my chest, one I hadn't even realized I was carrying, begin to loosen. "Thank you for saying that, Clara," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm getting a job," she said, a new resolve in her voice. "And I'm going to start taking classes at the community college. I'm not going to end up like them. I want to build my own life the right way, like you did." In that moment, she wasn't just my little sister anymore. She was an individual, stepping out of the shadows just as I had. She was the only one who had learned the right lesson from the family's downfall. I didn't know if our relationship could ever be fully healed, but for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of hope. A small bridge was being built across the chasm that had separated us for so long. While Clara was taking her first steps toward building a new life, the rest of my family was sinking deeper into the ruins of their old one. Their new reality was a harsh and unforgiving lesson in cause and effect. Their apartment was in a rundown complex with peeling paint and thin walls. I knew this because Clara had described it to me. She said it was a two-bedroom place, with Julian taking one room and my parents sleeping on a pull-out sofa in the living room. The kingdom had been reduced to a cramped, depressing box. The dynamic between them, once built on the false promise of Julian's success, had curdled into bitterness and resentment. My father, Mark, who had once been so proud and domineering, was now a broken man. He lost his job shortly after the move. The stress had made him irritable and unfocused, and after a conflict with his superior, he was let go. He spent his days watching television, his silence thick with the weight of his failure as a patriarch and a provider. My mother, Helen, tried to hold things together, but her optimism had been replaced by a sharp-edged anxiety. She worked extra shifts at the bank, her face etched with perpetual exhaustion. According to Clara, my parents barely spoke to each other anymore, except to argue in hushed, angry whispers about money, about Julian, and about the life they had lost. And Julian, his fall was the most dramatic of all. The online world that had been his stage was now his prison. He couldn't stream, his name was toxic. He had to get a real job. With no skills and no work history outside of his failed influencer career, the only thing he could find was a job at a large, big-box superstore on the edge of town. His new role was pushing carts from the parking lot back into the store, rain or shine. I saw him once. I was driving past the store and there he was, wearing a bright orange safety vest over his stained t-shirt. His face, once so full of smug confidence, was pale and gaunt. His shoulders were slumped. He was pushing a long line of rattling shopping carts, his movements slow and lifeless. Our eyes met for a brief second across the parking lot. I saw a flash of humiliation and pure, unadulterated hatred in his gaze before he quickly looked away. He, the prince, was now a peasant, and he couldn't stand the sight of the brother who had escaped the ruins he now inhabited. Occasionally, my parents would try to contact me. The calls would always start with awkward small talk, then pivot to a clumsy, veiled plea for money. "You know, Arthur, your father's car has been making a funny noise," my mother would say, or, "Things are just so tight right now. We're so proud of you, doing so well for yourself." I kept my responses polite but firm. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you figure it out." I never offered a dime. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about principle. My help wouldn't fix the fundamental problem. It would just be another bailout, another enabling act that would prevent them from ever facing the true consequences of their choices. They had made their bed, a lumpy, uncomfortable cot in a rundown apartment, and now they were forced to lie in it. Every single day was a reminder of what they had thrown away, and every rattling shopping cart was a testament to the son they had chosen to champion. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding in ways I had never imagined. Freedom wasn't just about having my own house. It was about having my own life, built on my own terms, filled with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. My first act of true freedom was an investment in someone else's future. After Clara showed me her acceptance letter to the community college and a detailed plan for her studies in nursing, I made a decision. I set up a dedicated college fund for her, enough to cover her tuition and books for the entire 2-year program. When I told her, she broke down in tears. "I can't accept this, Arthur. It's too much." "It's not a handout, Clara," I told her firmly. "It's an investment. I invest in people I believe in, and I believe in you. Just make me proud." It was the best investment I ever made. Watching her thrive, receiving her excited texts about passing a tough anatomy exam or excelling in her clinicals, brought me a quiet, profound joy. We were slowly, carefully, building a new kind of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine support. With the toxicity of my old life removed, my business flourished. I hired my first 2 employees, bright young analysts who shared my passion for helping people achieve financial clarity. We moved out of my home office and into a sleek, professional office space downtown. Not with a view of the whole city, as Leo had predicted, but it was a start. Clarity Financial became one of the most respected independent consulting firms in Richmond. My personal life blossomed as well. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my years of intense focus. My weekends were no longer spent locked in my room, but hiking in the nearby mountains, trying new restaurants, and going to concerts. I even started dating, a part of my life I had put on hold for far too long. For the first time, I was in a relationship where I felt seen and appreciated, a partnership of equals. My new house, once a symbol of my escape, became a home. It was no longer empty and silent. It was filled with the sounds of life. Leo and I had a standing poker night every other Thursday. Clara would come over for dinner once a week, bringing her textbooks to study at my large dining room table. One Saturday evening, I threw a housewarming party, something I had been putting off for months. The house was buzzing with energy. My friends, my employees, a few of my favorite clients, everyone was there. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of food from the grill. Leo found me on the back deck, looking out at the yard. He handed me a beer and clapped me on the shoulder. "Look at you, man," he said, a huge grin on his face. "You did it. You really did it." I took a sip of my beer and looked at the happy faces inside, at the warm glow of the lights, at the life I had built. The house across the street was dark and quiet, a distant memory. The ghosts of my past were finally gone. "Yeah," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I guess I did." I raised my bottle in a silent toast. Not to revenge, not to success, but to peace. To the quiet, beautiful, hard-won peace of a new dawn. Looking back on it all now, it feels like a story from another lifetime. The hurt, the anger, the feeling of being invisible, those things haven't vanished completely. They're part of my foundation, scars that remind me of the battles I fought to become the man I am today. But they no longer have power over me. They're entries in a final ledger, accounts that have been settled and closed. My journey taught me the most important lesson of my life. Your worth is not determined by the people who are supposed to love you. It's not a reflection in their eyes. It's a fire you build inside yourself, spark by spark, through your own hard work, your own integrity, and your own unwavering belief in the path you've chosen. My family tried to extinguish my fire, or rather, they never even bothered to acknowledge it was there. And in the end, their own world was consumed by the empty, flashy flames of the sun they chose to worship. The law of consequences is as real and as unforgiving as the law of gravity. They made their choices. They chose favoritism over fairness, illusion over substance, and ego over love. Their downfall wasn't my victory. It was simply the inevitable outcome of a lifetime of bad investments. I still live across the street from the house I grew up in. A new family lives there now, a young couple with 2 small children. Sometimes I see them playing in the front yard, their laughter echoing in the evening air, and it brings me a sense of peace. The house is no longer haunted by my memories. It's been given a fresh start, just like I have. My relationship with Clara continues to grow. She's at the top of her class in nursing school, and she has a strength and confidence I've never seen in her before. She's proof that it's never too late to step out of the shadows and choose a different path. As for my parents and Julian, I hear about them occasionally through the grapevine. Their lives are a stagnant pool of regret and bitterness. They never reached out to apologize, not really. They only ever reached out for a lifeline they hadn't earned. I've chosen to move forward without them, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Some debts can never be repaid, and some relationships are simply bankrupt. So this is my story. The story of the invisible son who learned to see himself. It's a story I wanted to share with all of you. Not for pity, but for proof. Proof that you can build an empire from the ruins of your own backyard. Proof that the quietest person in the room can often have the most powerful voice, once they decide to use it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with you. Have you ever felt overlooked or had to fight to prove your own worth? I'd be truly honored to read about your experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. Thank you again, and if you'd like to hear more, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.